Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife did the irreversible from the beginning and after. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy the show! Somehow, the rumble of my Mustang failed to wake the sleeping baby in his car seat strapped into the back. I had placed his baby seat in the passenger side so I could see him from the corner of my eye. How he could sleep through the symphony of roaring pistons was beyond me. I would probably wake from the dead to enjoy this. But perhaps, for a 2-year-old, the ability to fall asleep to the symphony was just additional proof beyond DNA tests and everything else that he was definitely my son. Then I saw it, my senses heightened like the warriors of old, my reflexes preparing my body for battle. My ears picked up the sound of an engine not very different from mine, while my eyes scanned the traffic ahead. There it was, a heavily modified Camaro. I noticed the beautiful red paint, obviously custom-made. The body kit seemed a little tacky to me, but then, not everyone likes my custom grille and spoiler. The driver of the Camaro saw me and slowed down. He started his engine, and my heart soared. His death would be epic, his shame and disappointment were already close. I could already see its end in my imagination as I found vectors and gaps in the flow of traffic. He couldn't even imagine how 600 horsepower under my hood would destroy his plastic little cart that looked like an insect. The smile on my lips widened as my foot caressed the accelerator. But then, common sense returned. My mind remembered that my son was in the back. My heart's joy dropped, and I actually slowed down to a speed below the limit. I looked at his tinted windows and shook my head. He didn't even realize how lucky he was. When traffic moved forward, it also slowed down. I felt his disappointment at being denied a battle that never happened. I felt it too, but my son's safety came first. 10 minutes later, fresh from a battle that never happened, I pulled into a driveway in a pleasant neighborhood. The house wasn't quite what it used to be, the grass was a little too long, the hedges needed trimming, and there were a few paint chips on the side of the house. All this could be explained by the pressures of family life. Sometimes, there just isn't enough time in the week to do absolutely everything. But what couldn't be explained was the lack of joy emanating from the home. Many of the houses in this neighborhood radiated happiness, love, or security. This one did not. I turned off the engine, and before the car stopped, the front door opened. The woman ran towards the car, and the closer she got, the more beautiful she became. Thick golden hair fell in waves and curls below her shoulders. Her breasts were barely contained in a thin t-shirt. Her narrow waist, even after giving birth, was so small that I could wrap my arms around it. I knew this because I'd done it so many times. She smiled as she approached the car. "How are my boys?" she asked. "He's sleeping," I said, trying to keep my voice as emotion-free as possible. "Okay, that's good," she smiled. "And what about you?" Even though every fiber of my being was dying to tell her, I let the matter pass. I opened the passenger door and pulled out the entire car seat. My son didn't even stir. "Well, at least I can tell my mom I saw you," she said. "When was the last time you saw her?" I just stared at her as she carried my son, car seat and all, towards the house. "Jake, that was really nice of you yesterday," she said. "Says you've been working like an ox all week. No one expected you to go and cut down those trees for her on Saturday and spend the whole day taking the baby to the zoo. You need to have a little fun too, remember? It's all work and no play." Again, I didn't answer. "So, honey, I was thinking," she continued. "I could ask my mom to babysit her grandson this weekend. She's dying to, you know, and we could make your greatest dream come true. We could fly to New Orleans for that and Rice Vampire Ball, the one you've always wanted to go to. And you could dress me any way you wanted." "You don't really want to do this," I said quietly. "You're right," she said, "but I would do anything for you. You should know this. And okay, Jake, maybe I have an ulterior motive, but JJ is 2 years old now, and I'm 27. You're good at math." "Very funny, Jake," she chuckled. "But you know where I'm going with this, right? JJ needs a brother or sister, and I want to have at least one more before I get too old to chase kids. And that might be a good thing." I kind of zoned out as she droned on about what she was going to do to me once we got to the hotel. I could see it all unfolding in my head. I could be the headless horseman in my costume, and she could be the prettiest vampire ever. Maybe we'll win the costume contest, she said. I could dress her any way I wanted. Sometimes I'm sure the reason we went wrong was my fault. Perhaps I left her alone too long, maybe I even loved her too much, or just trusted her too much. But for 7 years, everything I did was for her. From the very first second I saw her, I fell in love with her, literally. She worked at a restaurant on the campus of the college I attended. I looked at her and stopped what I was doing. I wanted to get closer to her, so I took a step towards her and fell on a chair that I didn't notice. I also fell right in front of her, and she tripped over me and dropped an entire tray full of plates and food. She was not a happy camper. Her first action to regain her balance was to call me every name she could think of. In my shame, I simply stood up and left the restaurant, angry, hurt, and covered in food. I returned to the house I shared with 3 other students. I immediately went to my room and took a shower. As usual, I immersed myself in my studies. A couple of hours later, my best friend Eric burst into my room. "Get your head out of your 5th place and come down," he shouted excitedly. "For what?" I muttered. "I need to study." "You study too much," he laughed. "Why the hell are you always studying?" College," I reminded him from behind the book. "See, that's why I dropped out of college," she said. I had never heard her voice, but it was as beautiful as she was. I immediately looked up. "It's all about studying," she said. "I just missed you to tears." I just sat and listened to her. "So, you accidentally tripped over the chair, huh?" she asked. "Obviously, you're better at studying than walking." "All I saw was you," I said quietly. She came up to me and smiled. "You are so beautiful that you didn't notice anything else," I continued. "I didn't see the chairs, walls, floor, or other people. But whether I saw them or not, they were there, so I tripped over one of them." She then laughed. "Sorry, you probably hear that all the time, right?" She nodded. "Yeah, every guy who sees me wants to take me out to dinner and then take me home and into bed," she said. "Sorry," I said. "I need a lot more than that." "I haven't even suggested it to you yet," I laughed. "But out of curiosity, what did you mean?" "I want to give you everything," I said. "My own home, family, and my heart, for starters. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy if you let me." "Give me money," she said. "I got fired today. Apparently, they don't like waitresses who constantly spill food." I handed her my wallet. She took out a $20 bill. "Are burgers okay?" she asked. I was surprised. "Are burgers good for our dinner?" she clarified. "Certainly," I exclaimed, liking the sound of the word "are." "I'll be back soon, she said. "Jacob," I smiled. "Aubrey," she replied, smiling back. "Shouldn't I go with you?" I asked. She just shook her head. "Keep learning, Jake," she said. "You need to be smart if you're going to take care of me for the rest of our lives. So, keep learning." 2 years later, we were married and living in our first home. After another 2 years, I started my own company producing custom prosthetics and orthoses for clients ranging from world-class athletes to everyday people. We also produced protective equipment for athletes who wanted to train or compete with minor injuries. My company was still small enough that everyone knew each other, but from a profit perspective, we were already considering several acquisition offers. The problem was that everyone who wanted to buy the company didn't want to continue the charity we were doing for injured children who couldn't afford prosthetics. But I liked what I did, and I liked Aubrey, so making a lot of money and becoming rich was not my plan. But as they say, ignorance is bliss. Her parents loved me too. We were one big happy family. Her parents did press us about when they could start visiting their grandchildren, but there were worse problems. My friend Steve hated his mother-in-law and father-in-law. They offered their daughter money to divorce him. Steve was a doctor. He was part of my team. He helped by supervising everything the engineers did when developing the prosthetics. He made sure everything was anatomically safe for our patients and also helped resolve any issues with device fit. I was able to hire him because he was laid off from 2 of the 3 hospitals in our area. He fit in well. Aubrey and I were very happy. We went on vacation several times a year and were inseparable when I wasn't working. She was my whole world, so I wasn't surprised when she started talking about planning our first child after several conversations. We both decided to wait a few more years until we were 30. This would be the perfect time to live. It would also give us a few more years to travel and enjoy each other. I think our timing could have been better because Aubrey's father died a few years later. My mother-in-law took his death hard. It took her a while to get over it, and during this time, we became close. I felt a kindred spirit in my mother-in-law. Unfortunately, shortly after this, I began to feel that something was wrong with Aubrey. "Jake, will you love me forever?" she asked me. "Forever and ever," I told her. "What about when we have a 3rd child and I have a fat 5th place?" she asked. "Even more," I smiled. "But why?" she asked. It made me think about her and us back then. "I've told you this a million times, Aubrey. We both know you're beautiful, and every guy who sees you wants you. It was like that 5 years ago when we first met, and it'll probably always be like that. But I love you, not just because of the way you look, but the person you are. I love you for the way you come in and pull me away from the computer when you think I'm working too much. I love you for the way you run around the house in one of my shirts and those big, fluffy slippers and nothing else. I love you for the way you look when we're working in the garden, covered in sweat and dirt, your hair a mess all over your face. Aubrey, I've loved you since the first sight, and I will love you until the last day of my life. I swear, no matter what happens to us, what you look like, or how much weight you gain." I hate to resort to Whitney Houston, but yay, I finished the last part on one knee in front of her. I knew it was sentimental, and maybe I was playing to the crowd a little. I expected her to laugh or hit me or something. Our eyes met, and tears flowed from her eyes like water from a sprinkler. The next thing I know, she was running into the bedroom and slamming the door behind her. She spent the rest of the day in the room and did not open the door. She told me she just needed time. I was sitting on the back porch watching the sun go down when she softly sat down next to me. She placed her hand in mine, which was further away from her, and wrapped my other hand around her. "Are we fine?" I asked. "Jake, I'm a woman," she said. "Sometimes we react to things in strange ways, Jake. I think after all this time, it finally dawned on me how much you really love me. I love you too. But this isn't one of those stories about 2 cute kids in high school, right?" "No, that's not true," I said. "But what caused it?" "I just found out that one of the girls I grew up with is getting a divorce. Her husband left for his personal assistant. They were in love and married, they have kids and everything. They had so many years together, and now nothing. The craziest thing is that Dana was ready to forgive him. She was ready to chalk it up to his little craziness and a casual affair. She wanted to welcome him back home, into her heart and her bed and all that. What's even crazier is that he didn't end up staying with the assistant, he left both of them. Guess what? A 6-foot-tall blonde with breasts the size of beach balls, and he was just tired of having a night with her. So, being pretty isn't everything. I think I realized how lucky I am to not only fall in love with the only man who loves me for what I am inside, but also to be married to him. This will never happen to us, I told her, and that meant more to me than anything I had ever set out to do up to that point in my life. Inside, I realized that I needed to spend more time with her. I needed to spend more time with us. So, the next day, I left work early and armed with a stupidly huge bouquet of flowers, I headed to our happy home. My mission was to convince the woman I loved that I truly loved her and would love her until the end of time. As I crept through my own house, I was in a good mood. When I didn't find her in the living room, kitchen, or bedroom, my joy began to fade. I heard a sound from the basement and thought she was probably doing laundry. Then I remembered the article we had read about women enjoying the dryer, and silently raced down the stairs. This was something I really wanted to see. I knew what would happen next, but I had already turned to leave. I stayed as long as I needed to because I needed to see her in action. I needed to commit what she did to my memory so that there would be no chance for us. I needed the heat of this vision to burn all my love for her from my heart. The flowers gave me away. They fell from my numb fingers and rustled across the floor. Even as I climbed the stairs, it didn't matter. I heard them sigh when a sudden sound interrupted their intercourse, and they separated as if someone was still there to see them. I don't remember getting into the car and driving away. I don't remember the last look at the house we loved so much. I was in shock. There was no anger, no rage, no sense of betrayal. At that moment, I only had an overwhelming need to be somewhere else. Perhaps it was the survival instinct of a wounded beast that forced me to move away from danger and find a place where I could recover so that I could fight again another day. Aubrey, he didn't even listen to me, and he needed to listen. Perhaps my choice of clothing was a mistake, but this was another one of those things that I needed to figure out. I needed to know if I could still turn him on. Life can be cruel sometimes. I offered him his deepest dream, and he had to stop and think about it. I think that said more about me than him. During the time he answered, my thoughts went ahead. I've always been beautiful. This is more of a curse than a blessing. All my life, I've had to put up with being stared at and misunderstood. I was always the center of attention when I just wanted to stay away. There was always some boy or many boys who wanted me without even knowing why they wanted me. I was always nominated as the queen of one thing or another simply because of my appearance. In high school, boys would fight over me. All I could do was smile and try to be friendly. I wasn't really interested in boys. I guess I was a late bloomer. Part of the problem was that I simply watched life pass me by. Most of my grades were unearned. My charms apparently had an effect on older men as well. I maintained a steady B average. Most male teachers gave me an A without doing any work. One of the teachers to another teacher gave me bad marks or tried to. I did as much extra work as I could for a class and still got a D. But I graduated from high school and entered the real world. I tried college, but since I didn't really learn anything in high school, I was woefully unprepared. After a year of wasting my parents' money, I quit. I noticed again that life was just passing me by. At 20 years old, still as beautiful as a new dawn, I had never been something I've never been kissed. I have never been caressed. I worked as a waitress and failed. My boss came to me and told me I was fired again when I came to collect my check. He had another idea. 40 minutes later, I was no longer a virgin, but I still had a job. It's funny, but I didn't feel anything. This got me thinking for most of my life. I didn't just watch it pass by. I was disconnected from it. I had no idea what love was. I also had no real hatred over the next few years. I began to use what I needed to succeed. It's not like I've become easily accessible or anything like that, but if I needed a few dollars to pay rent, I could get it. If I needed new shoes or an outfit, I got it. I had no ambitions or long-term plans. I met a lot of men because I was asked out frequently. Most guys just wanted me, some of them wanted more, but I couldn't give it to them. Even those with whom I had met more than once quickly noticed that there was no connection. Then one day, I had the crappiest day of my life. My boss had already told me that if I dropped another tray, I would be fired. I knew that I had reached the end of the road. Anyway, it had nothing to do with my lack of waitressing skills. My boss was tired of dealing with me. He gave my shifts to the new waitress. She was only 19 and had an exotic appearance. He also told me that she was really into it. As I started to think about what I should do next, I noticed a couple of guys around my age come in and sit down. I was glad they weren't sitting at one of my tables. They looked like college kids and were terrible tippers. The smaller one was really cute, though. It was unusual for me to think about this. I've never really reacted to the appearance of men. I was more responsive to their requests and what they had to offer me. Every time I crossed the room, I felt his gaze on me. I was used to it, but for some reason, his gaze alone seemed warm to me. I crossed the room again with a loaded tray and tried my best to be careful. I noticed that he was looking at me with his mouth open, as if I was without clothes or something like that. He even stood up when I approached him, then he tripped and fell right in front of me. Since I was carrying a tray, I didn't see it and stepped on it, tripping and throwing the entire tray. He called me every name he could think of, angrily packed up his gear, and got ready to leave. The second of the two guys came up to me. "For a woman as beautiful as you really are grumpy," he said. "It was an accident. Jacob didn't mean to trip you up." This is the first time in 6 months that I talked him into leaving the dorm, and then he saw you, the damn waitress, and acted like you were the god of retribution or something. I felt sorry for how I treated his friend, so I asked him to take me to his friend so I could apologize. From the moment I saw him again, I knew there was something about him. I thought we'd meet a few times and let it die down, but then he told me about his feelings and I melted. Nothing mattered anymore, I just wanted to be with him. It was weird because I hadn't into him, but that was always what the guys wanted. From that moment, we were together. Even in my mind, it seemed a little strange, but I had a boyfriend. I had more than that. He lived in a house he rented with a few other people, and I just moved into his room. There were days when I would follow him and wait outside his class for him to come out. I still didn't think what we had was love, but it was the closest I'd ever experienced. I didn't think I would ever feel true love, but I accepted that what Jake felt for me was love. I loved the fact that he loved me. I really loved the fact that he wanted to take care of me and build a life together. I had no ambitions, no plan for life, so I was smart enough to commit my life to a guy who could give me a much better life than I could ever have on my own. When he graduated with honors and got a good job, I was happy. He seemed to make all his promises come true. When he proposed to me, I was stunned. Yes, I said. I couldn't get the words out fast enough. It wasn't that I really loved him, I still wasn't sure what love was, but we had a connection. It also meant that I wouldn't have to worry about work or any other things. I could have a good life and not have to work. Besides, even if it doesn't last, if I can hold on long enough, even if I get divorced, I'll be fine. Over the years, we became more and more of a couple. I saw people around us getting married and having children, and I noticed that many of them were jealous of us. I think if I looked at us from the outside, it would seem that we have an ideal marriage. Jake was truly willing to do anything for me. There were times when I felt ashamed because I knew that I did not and would never feel the same about him. I'm simply not capable of such emotions. For him, I cleaned our house and made it a wonderful place to live. I had an intimate with him when he wanted and how he wanted. I was affectionate. We hugged constantly, and I tried to be attractive to him. When my father died, Jake was by my mother's side. I think that was the turning point because then I noticed that I didn't feel anything about my father's death. This made me realize that there was something wrong with me on an emotional level. Over the years, Jake and I talked about having kids a few times and decided to put it on hold. Then, I started thinking about it seriously, but soon after, I talked to a friend I grew up with. She was getting divorced and was desperate. Her husband left for a young woman, and she really wanted him back. I realized that my husband was probably like me. He cheated on my friend for years and finally got tired of pretending. He decided that he just wanted to be alone and free. This upset me, but I couldn't understand why. The man was a creep. Does this mean that I am like that too? Since the beginning of our relationship, I have occasionally had an intimate with other men. At that time, I was having a night with his friend. It wasn't because Jake was bad in bed, it also wasn't because I had any feelings for the other guy. He was just someone I could turn to from time to time. It started so as not to hurt Jake. 6 months ago, I was at home when the lawn care service came. I watched as a very well-built guy walked around our yard cutting and spraying the grass. I wanted him. I knew Jake would never know about this, so it wouldn't hurt him. That's why I did it. I walked to the door and called him inside. This was the first time I brought someone into our house for night, and it taught me 2 things. First, the guy, skinny, muscular, with long hair, the whole package, didn't give me as much pleasure as Jake did. Jake is attractive enough that a lot of women I know want him, but I don't think I've noticed him in a while. Either way, that day was a crack in my armor. Besides the fact that the guy didn't give me pleasure, I felt bad about it. This was the first time, so I decided that maybe I should stop. Maybe, even if I don't love him, I should respect him enough not to do this. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. One of the men who worked for Jake and was also his friend, a guy named Steve, came up to me and told me that he had evidence of me cheating on Jake. To keep him from telling Jake, I had to give him the same thing I gave the lawn service guy. So I did it and didn't feel anything. I even felt good about it because instead of just having an intim, I did it to help our marriage in a way. It worked because the guy had a history of cheating on his wife. He was caught several times. It also gave me an outlet, so instead of risking getting caught with random guys, I had someone I could turn to when Jake wasn't available. But everything changed after a conversation with my friend. She wasn't like me, she really loved this idiot, and now she was faced with a life of loneliness and unhappiness with her children. I wondered if this could happen to me. Later, when Jake came home, I asked him if he really loved me. His answer amazed me. I eventually ran away from him, upstairs to our bedroom. I needed to get away from him, I couldn't look him in the eye. I just wasn't worthy of the way he treated me. Then I realized that he loved me much more than I ever imagined. I didn't deserve to be loved this way. Perhaps it was guilt, but I decided that the best thing I could do for him was leave. I should have just disappeared, but then I thought about how much it would hurt him. I started crying. I thought for a long time about how my life would be without him. I realized that even one day without seeing this man would probably kill me. Then I started to realize that when I kiss Jake, it's because I like kissing him, and when we have a night, it's because I want it. I didn't just want him, I wanted Jake. It took me a while to realize this, but I love my husband. That night, Jake and I had an intimate. Don't get me wrong, we always do this, but it was as if all the years before that night I had been holding back. That night, I gave him everything I had. It felt so different. It was as if everything I did with every other man was a waste of time. I've been an idiot most of my life. We fell asleep that night, hugging each other. When he kissed me goodbye the next morning, I was a different woman. I couldn't stop smiling. I repeated this over and over again, I love my husband. I called to tell his friend that we would no longer be dating. He talked to me one last time. I wanted it to end, so I told him to come over that afternoon while Jake was at work. He was for it. When he arrived, we went straight to the laundry room in the basement. I've never had a night with him anywhere else before, even before I knew how I felt about Jake. I respected him too much to let anyone in our bed. As soon as he arrived, he rushed at me, but there was no love in it, although there had never been any before. It was just a night. The night before I made love to Jake, we kissed. It was magical, and I intended to do it again that evening. It was just intimate, we had just had a night for the sake of physical satisfaction. It's strange, but in most cases, I didn't experience pleasure with him. But that day, I was still in my happy mood, thinking about what happened the day before, and my newfound love was making me hotter than ever. So, my body reacted. But before we finished, I heard something. I pushed him away from me, but it was obvious that he heard it too. We looked out into the corridor and saw nothing. He shrugged and reached out to me again. "We're done," I said. I felt worse and worse about what happened. We will never talk about this again, and it will never happen again. If you call me again, I will tell him, and you will have as much loss as I have, if not more. He nodded and began to get dressed. "You can leave yourself," I told him. I turned to go upstairs and shower. I needed to prepare to make this evening truly special for Jake and me. When I approached the stairs, my heart almost stopped. My whole life flashed before my eyes, and I realized how empty it was before I met Jake. My cry of despair brought my friend back. "What's happened?" he asked. I pointed to the flowers that were scattered along the steps. "Oh, shit," he said, shaking his head. I didn't know what to do. I took a shower and changed clothes. I cooked dinner. My only hope was that maybe this time, as my girlfriend and as Steve's wife, Jake would get angry, call me a bunch of names, and then forgive me. I needed another chance, and this would never happen again. I knew that I really loved him. All I wanted was a chance to make Jake the happiest man in the world. I told myself that Jake loved me and that he promised me forever. As soon as it got dark, I started to worry. Jake always called me if he was going to be late. I called his phone and realized that I had problems. I didn't receive a connection, there wasn't even a call. If I had any doubts about Jake's feelings, they disappeared. My husband blocked me. I had to wait for him to come home to talk about our problems. I sat down on the sofa to wait for him. I assumed he probably went out for drinks with friends before returning home. My only defense against my perceived wrath was knowing how much I thought Jake loved me. Supposedly, I dozed off during the evening. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning in the dark. I went upstairs, thinking that Jake was so angry that he just walked past me and went to bed. When I noticed our bedroom was empty, I checked both guest rooms and then just started crying. It was the first time I remember crying about anything in my adult life. It felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. If this is love, I could do without it. The next morning, I felt even worse. I tried calling Jake again, but nothing changed. I called his office and received a message after office hours. I asked his secretary to call me back as soon as she arrived. I lay back on the sofa and waited by the phone. Brenda called me about 10 minutes after 9. Her voice was cheerful and friendly as always. "What's wrong, Mrs. Boss?" she asked. "Brenda, you need to help me," I said. "Jake and I have a problem. I really need to talk to him. Can you ask him to call me as soon as he gets here?" "Oh my God," she said. "You look terrible." "Of course, I'll make him call you. I'll do better. As soon as he comes in here, I'll just hand him the phone and tell him to talk. I was his secretary before you two got married. Of course, you already were together, but this is the first time I remember you two having a fight. Everything will be fine, Aubrey. He really loves you." The phone call came about an hour later. I grabbed the phone and started talking. "Jake, I love you more than anything in this world. I'll do whatever you want, just come home," I said. "Aubrey, this is Brenda," she said. "Jake just called. He said he was taking the day off because he wasn't feeling well. I told him to call you." I thanked her and hung up. I didn't know what to do next. Steven. When I left home, I couldn't leave fast enough. I took the phone from my belt and placed it on the seat next to me. I expected Jake to call me at any moment. "Crap!" I shouted. There was no one to blame but himself. Jake was more than my boss, he was more than a friend. When I graduated from medical school, I was not the best student in my class. I had great difficulty finding a place in a hospital, although there were 3 in the area. I had a huge pile of student loans, and I also had a wife and 2 small children. I didn't just want a job, I needed a job. I needed work more than air. Finally, I got a job as a hospitalist at General District Hospital. After 2 years and several problems, I was fired. I was lucky that I wasn't sued for medical malpractice. After that, I was hired at Tremont Hospital. I didn't stay there long. The 3rd hospital in the area didn't even interview me. But luckily, I met Jake. He had a couple of doctors and some medical students from Tremont who worked for him under contract. As his business grew, he needed to hire a full-time medical professional. It was at that moment that I was fired. It was good for both of us. Everything has been great in the last 3 years. I make more money working for Jake and work fewer hours with much less pressure. I have to admit I cheated on my wife, Carly, a few times and got caught a few times. But I love her and my children. I was just under so much pressure when she caught me the last time. I swore I'd never do it again, and I meant it. I don't think I would be in this situation if it weren't for bad luck. Aubrey was hot, there was no doubt about it. But if the opportunity to have a little fun with her had not presented itself, I would never have taken a step in her direction. I caught this cheating on Jake and took advantage of it. I probably should have felt bad about it, but in my own way, I truly believed I was helping him. If she cheated on him one way or another, sooner or later they would be caught, and he would be hurt. At least with me, I would do everything possible to avoid getting hit and not hurt him. Moreover, I would never try to take Aubrey away from him. There was no love in what we did, there was something else going on here, too. It took me a while to understand this. At first, I saw Aubrey as this beautiful woman that any man would want. At first, I was a little jealous of Jake. But after spending time with Aubrey, I started noticing things. Aubrey was like Barbie, she was the ideal example of a woman. She was almost too beautiful, too nicely. But that was only on the surface, she had no emotions at all. Having an intim with her was like having a night with a living, breathing blow-up doll. The only time I felt any warmth from her was when she talked about Jake, and we didn't talk about him often because I was very ashamed of what I did to him. I went back to work that day, expecting to be called into his office at any moment or for him to come to me. To my surprise, he never showed up. This was unusual because Jake and I usually talked several times a day. I felt terrible. Time passed very slowly. When it was time to go home, I took off like a rocket. I hugged Carly and my kids over and over again as soon as I walked into the house. The next morning, I went to work and still hadn't seen Jake. It was strange because Jake was usually the first one at work. When I had a problem that I couldn't solve without him, I went looking for him. Then I found out that he took a vacation. I smiled then. At first, I was sure that Jake and Aubrey were working on their marriage. I was confident that Aubrey would be on my side if necessary, so I probably wouldn't get fired. At about 11 in the morning, she called me. I wondered why she was calling me. I didn't answer the phone. She called again a few minutes later, so I answered. "I thought we weren't going to talk anymore," I said sharply. I was not prepared for the amount of emotion that was coming from her. Just hearing the pain in her voice made me feel even worse. "He's gone," she sobbed. She went on to say that she talked to everyone she could think of to call. She even called the police. All she wanted was for me to go out and look for him. She wanted me to check out all the places he and I used to go. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Aubrey," I said. "You are a coward," she blurted out. "Are you brave enough to sleep with his wife behind his back but not brave enough to face him?" Her words hurt me deeply. I already felt bad enough. "All you have to do is find him," she said. "Just call me and tell me where he is." I decided I could do this. I looked for him everywhere I could think of, but I couldn't find him anywhere. I felt even worse. My friend, the only person who believed in me and gave me a chance when no one else wanted it, was somewhere alone. He was obviously in pain and heartbroken, and I was the person responsible for that. Aubrey, the police didn't help at first. They refused to start searching until he had been missing for 48 hours. I called them at least 10 times before they finally agreed to send a detective. When they finally sent a detective, things got worse. One of the detectives was a woman, and she immediately disliked me. They started asking questions, and I had to tell them why Jake left. The investigation quickly changed after that. I had to give them Steven's contact information. They also started interrogating him. I really believe they thought Steven and I killed Jake or something, but they told me that I should hire a lawyer. I will never forget the look the female detective gave me as she left my house. She looked at me as if I were the lowest creature on earth. I didn't care. All I wanted was to get my husband back. 2 days later, she called me. "I was wrong about you," she said. "It looks like you didn't kill him. You tore his heart out and left him for dead, but you didn't kill him. Did you find him?" I screamed joyfully. "We found him," she said. "So you're no longer a suspect, neither is your equally sneaky friend." Then she hung up. You forgot to tell me where he is before you hung up," I said. "I haven't forgotten," she said in the most sarcastic tone I've ever heard in her voice. "He's an adult. Considering what you did to him, he's in good mental health, and he doesn't want us to reveal his whereabouts to you. Legally, I can't go against his wishes. Have a nice day. You should still hire a lawyer." I knew a way to get to him once I realized that he was fine and just mad at me. I felt a lot better just knowing he was okay. It made my day. I still wanted to see him, but this was an improvement. I called my mom. Jake loved her, and if she called, he would answer. I had to try really hard to maintain my composure while I was talking to her. She had as many questions as the police, and when I admitted that the fight was my fault, she wanted to know what I did. I just begged her to call him. Almost 2 hours later, I called her again. My mom was getting a little older, so I was sure she talked to him and forgot to call me back. She didn't do this. She refused to call me after talking to him. "Mom, I know this sounds bad, but Jake doesn't understand some things," I said. "I know what I did was very bad, but Jake really doesn't understand what he told you I did." "Jake didn't tell me what you did," she said, "but I kind of knew from the way you were sneaking around trying to reach him. It was your fault, Aubrey. You're my daughter. I love you. I've loved you since your first breath. I'll always be by your side in most matters, but I'm not going to help you kick the puppy. Mom, I'm not trying to kick him. I love him, and I want him back, I said. Aubrey, you didn't hear the pain in that man's voice, she said. You hurt him badly. A lot of people love that man, and I'm not sure he'll ever be the same. Whatever you did, I hope it was worth it. Jake, the first week, I did nothing. I sat in the hotel and just suffered. Almost immediately after I left the house, I blocked Aubrey's numbers and home number on my iPhone. I could still call her, but incoming calls wouldn't even connect. I called Brenda and told her I was taking a vacation. The first couple of days, I just ate, slept, and thought. I was going through every aspect of my life. I realized that Aubrey didn't love me. I realized this not through wit or insight, but through mathematical proof. I knew I loved Aubrey. I love her deeply and completely. I could never touch another woman. Aubrey had no such restrictions, therefore, she could not love me. Once I realized this, I had to decide what to do about it. On the third day, a police detective visited me. She was a tall, beautiful woman, and she looked at me with concern in her eyes. After our conversation, I asked her not to reveal my location to Aubrey, and she said that I had no reason to worry. The next day, I talked to Aubrey's mom. Talking to her really made me feel better. A conversation with my mother-in-law made me realize something else. I didn't do anything wrong. My only mistake was that I fell in love and trusted the wrong woman. I also trusted the wrong person as a friend. I was not yet 30 years old. I still have so much life ahead of me to give up. The next morning, I did something I haven't done in a long time. I went for a run. I was a little out of shape, so the first day was not easy for me. When I got back to the hotel, I had a great breakfast and started making calls. I called Brenda first and then my lawyer. I told Brenda I would be back at work, but not during the day. I will come in the evening, deal with contracts, and leave tasks for everyone. I asked her to start quietly looking for a replacement for Steven, but not to say a word about it. Are you back home yet? She asked. Aubrey was. Brenda, just do as I asked, I said. My regular business lawyer gave me the contact information for a guy who he said was the best family law specialist in the state. The next day, I met with him. I told him the details of the case and, fortunately, I did not need proof. Both Aubrey and Steven were questioned by police and confessed to the scam. This then became part of the public record. I didn't do anything with our bank accounts. I didn't withdraw money or hide it. I didn't want to leave Aubrey without a livelihood. I didn't want to hurt her. I still loved her too much to do that. But I needed to get her out of my head and life. The next thing I looked at was that I needed a change. I had money. I decided to use some of it. I hired a real estate agent to find me a new home. I've heard that in divorce cases, the woman usually gets the house. My lawyer told me that since it was not my fault and we had no children, I could stay with him. But I didn't want it. I wasn't sure I could go into that house again. There were also other things that needed to be changed. I remember one day I walked out of the hotel to meet my real estate agent and looked at my car. Aubrey and I had similar BMWs. Our cars were a couple, like I always thought we would be. But if we are no longer a couple, why don't I have another car? By the end of the day, I was driving a black Mustang GT. I took the car to a tuning shop and changed its appearance. The factory wheels had to be replaced. I chose black 20-inch halo wheels. I really liked how the black wheels gave the car a more sinister look. 2 days later, I also tinted the windows. I then replaced the factory grills with black billet grills and a splitter. After that, I darkened the headlights on all sides of the car. I then replaced the factory brakes with larger black vented rotors and bright yellow brake calipers. After that, I started upgrading the engine. Since I left most of my clothes at home, I had to buy new ones. I also cut my hair. I felt like a new person. My lawyer told me that he had the documents ready, and we could serve them on her when I was ready. I decided to wait a day or two. The next day, I returned to work. I called Brenda and told her I was returning and that she could schedule interviews to replace Steven. When I walked into the office, Brenda screamed. She rushed to me and hugged me. Without telling her exactly what happened, I made it clear that Aubrey and I had broken up. She seemed to feel as bad as I did. I walked down the hallway and saw several new faces in Stephen's lab. I simply smiled and went back to my office to start going through my morning papers. At about 10 o'clock, he entered the outer office looking for Brenda. "What the hell is going on?" he asked. "Why are these people in my laboratory?" She simply pointed to my door. Stephen entered. Seeing me, his face changed. "Jake, I'm sorry," he said. "No, Stephen," I said, "you're fired." "Jake, can I explain?" he asked. He approached me as he would have done hundreds of times before. I don't know where it came from, but I suddenly felt anger like I'd never felt before in my life. I hit him twice, once in the stomach and once in the face. It felt like hitting a harmonica pack. "Pack everything and leave my building within the hour," I spat as he stood up and wiped the blood from his face. "Jake, I just want to talk," he said as I closed the office door in his face. I sat down at my desk and made a phone call. "I'm ready," I said. "We can do it, Aubrey." It's been almost a month since I've seen Jake. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. All I could do was lie there, waiting for him to stop being mad at me. I wasn't even lying in our bed, I was on the sofa. I was too afraid that he would try to sneak into the house to get his clothes or anything else he needed, and I would miss the chance to see him. Every time I heard someone approaching the door, I would jump and run towards it, only to be disappointed when it wasn't him. Every time the phone rang, I dove for it, hoping that he had finally decided to call me. I wished with all my heart to return to the way things were before. Being distant and emotionless had never felt so good to me as it did as I sat there, alternating tears with trying to come up with a plan to get him back. Suddenly, the phone rang. I was expecting another telemarketer, so I glanced at the call screen. It was Jake's office number. I picked up the phone so quickly that I surprised myself. "Jake, I'm so sorry," I began hastily. "Please, Aubrey, this is Brenda," she interrupted. "I just wanted to tell you that he's back at work today, honey. He's changed, he's more withdrawn and at the same time more emotional than ever. Jake isn't smiling anymore. At first, I thought it was just a haircut or that he dresses differently, but he's definitely changed. He punched Steve in the mouth and fired him. He had security literally throw him out of the building. Then he went back to work like nothing happened. I'm calling you because I was hoping you could come here and calm him down. I have to go, he just called me." I stood up, suddenly filled with energy. This was a good sign. Even when he was angry, Jake never stayed that way for long. His record for longest being angry at me was the time I was rushing to the mall and having one of my blonde moments. I backed into his new car in our driveway. It was a big insurance mess. We had to pay deductibles on both cars, and the insurance company was resistant to paying for all the repairs. Jake got so angry with me that he didn't talk to me for about an hour. All it took was a shot of sad eyes. "I'm really sorry, honey," and delivered pleasure. I realized that since Jake left, I haven't showered or taken care of myself. I was too upset to even care about my appearance. I quickly jumped into the shower because I didn't know when he would get home. Washing my hair took a while. I had to dry it and try to style it. After that, I wore one of the outfits that Jake hated seeing me wear in public. It wasn't very revealing and covered me quite heavily. The skirt was about 3 inches below my knees, but it hugged my body in a way that accentuated my curves. I only wore it because I wanted him to remember what he was losing by being mad at me. Before I could even choose a pair of shoes, I heard the car door slam shut, and I was stunned. It took me longer to get ready than I thought. Jake was home. I ran down the stairs, almost tripping in the process. I balanced and continued moving. I didn't want him to find me in this state. I had to get to the door and pulled it open just in time to see a woman who was almost my doppelganger reaching out to ring the bell. Her hand froze just before touching the button as she stared at me. We both assessed each other before speaking. She was the same height as me. Her hair could have been a couple of shades lighter than mine, leaning toward a very light blonde, while mine was golden blonde. I think my hair was a couple of inches longer. My breasts were bigger, but not by much. Her legs were definitely better. She shook her head as if the comparison confused her too. This whole scene only took a couple of seconds, but it seemed much longer. She had her briefcase in one hand and reached into it to take out a folder. She was definitely younger than me. I gave her the age of 21 or 22, so I was at least 4 or 5 years older. After she checked the file, she looked at me, and I noticed that she was chewing gum. "Are you Aubrey Adama?" she asked very defiantly. She even popped her gum a few times, waiting for my brain to activate so I could respond. Then I realized who she was. After promising to love me forever, it only took Jake a month to replace me with a young woman who was almost my clone. He was trying to show me that I was as replaceable as everything else he left in the house. I wanted to cry then, but I wasn't going to let a single tear fall in front of that. "Yes, I am," I said almost defiantly. "And you can say you've handed it to me," she said quickly, interrupting me. Then she turned to leave. "Wait," I said. "I need you to give Jake a message." "Who is Jake?" she asked, clicking her gum impatiently. "My husband, your new lover. He sent you here to demonstratively show me that." I began. "Listen, Grandma, the only lover I have is Brandon, and I'm only doing this to make money so we can buy a house when he gets back from military service. I don't know any Jake. I'm a paralegal, some lawyer or the court is paying my company to serve you these papers. I don't even know what's in them. It could be a writ of summons, a subpoena, hell, it could be a notice that your driver's license is suspended for numerous cases of drunk driving. Have a nice day." As I watched her leave, I felt relieved. I knew what was in the papers. The man whose car I accidentally hit in the supermarket parking lot a couple of months ago found me. I knew I probably should have left a note, but at the time, I didn't want Jake to get mad about another increase in our insurance, so I just left. There are cameras everywhere now. They must have filmed me in one of them. I'll probably have to go to court and pay for the damage to some guy's car. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Hey, Aubrey," my next-door neighbor, Fred, called. I waved back, not saying a word, as I opened the folder to look at the papers. Everything became blurry, and my legs gave way when I saw on the first page that Jake was filing for divorce. It seemed like everything was happening in slow motion, the concrete surface of our porch simply rising to meet me. My mind was still working. In fact, it seemed to go into hyperdrive but was completely disconnected from my body. It seemed like my brain was so consumed with trying to understand this one thing that nothing else mattered. I heard Fred yelling rudely at someone, probably his wife Ethel, to call an ambulance. After a few seconds, he gently patted my face and asked if I was okay. I vaguely remember him saying something like, "Only a fool would look a gift horse in the mouth." Then he started feeling my breast. I wanted to say something or push him away, but my mouth didn't work, and I couldn't raise my hands. To be honest, I didn't care. My world collapsed, or rather, I destroyed it. Then a quarrel began. Ethel ran out to see what was going on and caught Fred groping my breast. "What the hell are you doing?" she shouted at him. "I'm doing CPR," he shouted back. "Nonsense, you're groping her." "Your hands weren't pressing on her chest, you were groping her breasts," Ethel said. "Her breasts are so big, they cover her entire chest," he said. "Mine are bigger than hers." "Not by much," said Ethel. "And the rest of your body is 4 times her size. It's about proportions. You'll have plenty of time to learn about prison proportions after Jake is done with you. You know how he feels about it. He'll break you to pieces, you old pervert," she grinned. Fred quickly removed his hands from my chest. "But it was just CPR," he said plaintively. "Bullshit," Ethel snorted. "You don't do CPR on someone who's breathing." "Hey, it worked," Fred said. "I saved her life." "You didn't do anything," Ethel shouted. "These balls have been going up and down since I came here. As soon as Jake gets back from his business trip, I'll tell him what you did." "Oh, please, Ethel," he begged. "If you tell him, he'll—" At this moment, Fred was pushed aside by the arriving paramedics. My next conscious thought was of my mother talking to me in the hospital. She leaned over me and tried to speak, but I still had no strength to talk. The nurse came in and spoke to her. "She's going through some shock from receiving very bad news," the nurse said. "Her vitals are good. We are now analyzing her blood and running a full battery of tests to see if there are any physical problems." My mother then turned to her and asked, "I called her husband, he'll be here in a few minutes." They seemed to notice that my heart rate had increased when Mom said, "Jake would be arriving soon." A few minutes later, I heard his voice. He entered the room with my mother, and I heard them talking about me. She got some news and went into shock, my mother said. It's my fault, Jake said. Getting the divorce papers probably caused it. Jake, what are you talking about? Asked my mother. You don't need a divorce. What does this all mean? You'll have to ask Aubrey about that, he said. It's not my place to tell you whatever it is. It hits you so hard that I can see you're ready to cry, my mother said. Someone needs to tell me something. I gave her half of everything, he said. She gets the house, I keep the business. We split everything else equally. My lawyer said I could have gotten a much better deal, but I don't want to hurt her. I want her to be happy, I just don't want to hurt myself more. His voice trembled. I began to understand what I had done. I tried to get up, but my arms and legs were still like jelly. My mouth also did not obey. Jake, you two are not getting divorced, my mom said. This isn't going to work, it's like one of those cheesy Lifetime movies. You're better together. We never talked about it, but I was worried about Aubrey until you showed up. She just never seemed connected to anything. She doesn't have interests, not many friends, and no ambitions. She was empty, like a beautiful doll. I thought she might go into modeling or something like that, but then I read all these articles about the modeling world and realized that she wouldn't fit in there. Her breasts and butt were too big. But when she met you, everything started to change. She pushed him towards a chair and made him sit down. And you, Jake, when she first brought you home, her father and I were shocked. I mean, my daughter had dated a lot of guys before you, but we knew she didn't care about any of them. And you were the first person she actually brought home and introduced to her dad and me. Honestly, we didn't think you'd stick around. Not because we didn't like you, but Jake, you weren't her type. You're the kindest person on the planet, darling, but the typical Aubrey guy was more determined, maybe I should say more confident. But you've both blossomed. Next thing I knew, you had started your own business, and my little girl clearly loved you and was getting ready to make a good home for you and my grandchildren, whenever you decide to have them. Whenever would be nice. Both of you love each other. Jake, look at you, you're so emotional, and Aubrey is in the hospital. You not being together is bad for all of us. Well done, Mom, I thought. Prepare him for me, I'll get my man back yet. But her words did not pass me by, she was right. She reduced our lives to a few simple sentences. Perhaps the fact that he seemed responsive to her words began to make me feel better. Mom always found a way to Jake. Maybe it was because he lost his parents at such a young age, but my mom seemed like his mom too. Then the nurse came in. She spoke in that fake cheerful, pseudo-professional tone that nurses like to use. You're the husband, right? She asked. I guess, Jake replied. At least for now, my mother silenced him. Just as I thought, said the nurse. I realized that this tramp wanted to flirt with my husband. I looked at him from the corner of my eye, and my shock increased. He had cut his hair and looked really good, but something was wrong with him. Only those who loved him would notice this. His smile had disappeared, the smile that I sometimes woke up early in the morning just to see. It seemed that my wide-eyed, cheerful boy husband had suddenly matured and become cynical and suspicious. I vowed to somehow return him to his former self. There's good news and bad news, the nurse said. She is severely dehydrated and malnourished. What's the good news? Asked my mother. I thought that was good news, Jake quipped. My mom nudged him with her elbow. She's pregnant, the nurse said. With everything going on in her body, whatever news she got this morning just overwhelmed her and she collapsed. She'll be fine, she just needs a little TLC. The nurse looked straight at Jake when she said this. I guess I can hire someone to look after her, Jake said. This is not what she needs and you know it, my mother said. You need to come home, Jake. Your absence has made her sick. Don't you want a healthy baby? It's probably not even my baby, he said. Anger filled me and gave me strength. You're crazy. I screamed. Of course it's your baby. Who else could I get pregnant with? I love you, fool. I've made mistakes, but you should know how I feel about you. When can she leave? He asked the nurse. She needs to stay here for a few hours for observation and she needs an appointment with an OB, the nurse said. But she'll probably be able to leave here by mid-afternoon. Mom, can you stay with her and take her home? He asked. I have a few things to do. My mother tilted her head and looked at him. I'm going to check out of the hotel and get my things. Then I need to meet with my lawyer, he said. But I should be home by 3 o'clock or 4. See you at home, honey, I said. I couldn't stop smiling. I am pregnant. It really wasn't planned. I took the pills, but they were clearly not completely reliable. I tried to get up and found that my legs were still very weak. Were you in such a hurry? Asked the nurse. I need to get ready for Jake to come home, I smiled. I had to wait for him for more than 4 hours. It felt like 4 years. I had to visit doctors and make appointments with other doctors. I needed nourishment to regain my strength. It seemed like they were just trying to separate us. My mom wasn't helping at all. He loves you, Aubrey, she said. You can see it in the terms of the divorce, even after you betrayed him. Who told you? I asked. I'm old, she said, but not stupid. Jake loves you more than life itself, but suddenly he just walks away from you. And he does it so quickly that he doesn't even pack his things. He finds out that you're pregnant and he's not even sure if the child is his. Not a rocket scientist, are you, to understand it? But deep down, I hope you're a rocket scientist or a witch because I'm pretty sure if the baby isn't his, he'll leave. Aubrey, I got a little scared then because I realized that my plan B, the idea of just divorcing Jake, wasn't working for me anymore. I couldn't believe it, but I really loved this man. I just didn't want to try to live without him. As my mother was driving me home, my phone rang. Aubrey, are you and Jake getting a divorce? Stephen asked in a tone full of panic. I'm not sure, I said. If I can do anything to avoid this, I will. I wasn't so lucky, he said. Jake is suing me. He's going to ruin me. I was lucky I was at home and I was the one served with the subpoena. I told Carly it was a medical malpractice lawsuit from the old hospital. I told her it was none of my business, but that I consulted on it. She believed. But if Jake doesn't drop the lawsuit, she will find out and my marriage might be ruined. It could also affect me before the medical ethics board. I could lose my license. Aubrey, when Jake hired me, there have already been several incidents at work. I've been fired twice. Being a coworker's wife would be the third case. If this goes to court and becomes public, my career is over. You have to do something to help me. If you don't help, I'll have to blame you to save myself. I hate making threats, but my life is on the line. I hung up on him. Before she left, my mother made me soup and watched me eat it. How many times have you cheated on him? She suddenly asked me. I looked at her in surprise. Only once, I started. Aubrey, you're a monster, she said, shaking her head. You should really turn up the volume on your phone. I heard everything that guy said to you while I was driving you home. He said it wasn't the first time you cheated on Jake, and he sounded like such a jerk. I really hope that he is not the father of my grandson. This guy is already married, isn't he? Does he have children too? I said. So, if it's his baby, everyone suffers except Jake. If it's Jake's baby, everyone is forgiven except Jake. What do you mean? I asked. If Jake is the father, he won't leave his child. He will be stuck with you just to make sure his child grows up okay. If Jake is not the father, he can get out of this. He can move on with his life and find someone less toxic. But my grandson will grow up with a father who is no good and a mother who. Mom, I think you should leave. I shouted. I didn't mean to hurt Jake. I love him. Aubrey, do you even know what love is? She asked as she left. After she left, I thought a lot about what she said. I sat on the couch and happily waited for Jake. I got bored waiting, so I went outside and sat on the steps. While I waited, I looked at my watch. It was 3:30. I started to get nervous. He said he'd be home by 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. Fred Mers walked by and waved. Are you okay, huh? He asked. Yes, but my breasts hurt, I said. It looks like he choked on something. So why are you just sitting here? He asked. Jake will be home soon, I said. He turned pale and ran into his house. About 10 minutes later, a car stopped in our yard. It was a sinister-looking car. Almost every part of the car was black. The driver turned off the engine, and Jake got out. He looked at me. I smiled at him, but he didn't smile back. He slowly walked towards me, as if he was going to the scaffold. Welcome home, honey, I said. Just leave it, he said. He walked past me and entered the house. He went upstairs and entered our bedroom. I followed him. When I entered the room, he was sitting on the bed. He watched me as I entered the room. What are you doing? He asked. I thought you might. I stuttered. I was just sitting here trying to figure out what to do with my clothes, he said. What do you mean? I asked. I have so many costumes and so many things here that it would take forever to move it all to another room, he said. Then I thought that since you were at home most of the time, and you are the one who ruined us, it would be fair for you to move to another room. But then I realized that since you were pregnant, it would be more correct if I move. I'm just afraid of this, he explained. Maybe it's not fear, I said. Maybe it's common sense, Jake. We're married. We should sleep together. We should be together. We just need to mend things between us. I know it will take time, but everything will go smoothly if we just go for it and try to forget about the past. I swear that I love you and will never betray you again. Can you really look me in the eyes and tell me you don't love me, Aubrey? It's like that Joan Jett song, he said. I hate myself for loving you. We need to come to terms with what happened, he continued. We need to be honest with each other. Yes, I still love you with all my being. But at the same time, you have hurt me more than anyone ever has, and I don't want to be around you. My plan was to divorce you and either move to another state with my business or sell it and start over somewhere else. My mouth dropped open in shock. I didn't realize he'd given the whole situation so much thought. I've never met a man in my life who literally didn't want me around him. And as luck would have it, this had to be the only man I really wanted to be with. Come on, Aubrey. We're still young. We're not even 30 yet. Nothing is set in stone yet, he said. It's really not too late for both of us to start over. I can find a woman who really wants to be with me. I can start a new life and have my own children. He told me his face was absolutely serious. He was not joking or mocking. And you'll be free to do whatever you want. You'll be able to find a man who's better for you, you know, like your mom said, someone more determined and confident. I crossed the room in an instant and hit him. Your mom doesn't know anything, I said. The conversation you had with her was so full of holes it could have been a sieve. I stopped because I really needed to calm down and collect my breath. Jake, she told you that I was usually with someone more determined. First of all, it was just guys who wanted me, and that was all. Once they got what they wanted, it was over. That's why she told you, in her own words, that I never brought any of those guys home. Not one. You were the first man I ever brought home and introduced to my parents, and you're the only one. You're also the only one I've ever lived with. And Jake, I swear to God, you're the only person I've ever loved, and that includes my parents. You're the only person I have any connection to. I don't know why, maybe I'm broken, but it's true. I noticed that some of his anger had subsided. The next thing you don't understand is your child, Jake. This child is growing in my body, and I swear to you that it is yours. You are the only person I have ever been with without protection at all. It really was true. I know you don't want to be here. You hate me or you love me but don't want to be with me anymore. I can understand that. I hate myself for what I did to us. You're the best thing to ever happen to me, Jake, and this is your baby. Can we come to an agreement? As soon as the baby is born, we will do a DNA test. If the baby is yours, we will try to make things right. If it is not yours, I will sign your divorce papers on the spot, or better, I'll just leave your life and you will never see me again. But until then, can we just try to get along for the sake of the baby? He nodded, and it seemed that even more anger was gone. I'm tired, I said. Can we take a nap? I went far away, and his anger flared up again. I agree to your terms, he said sharply. I'll stay here. I'll buy you everything you need for the baby. I'll take you to doctor's appointments and do whatever needs to be done to make sure everything goes well. I'll behave myself. I'll even be nice to you because children, even unborn ones, feel such things. But that's all. We won't do anything else together. And he meant every word. Whatever I needed, he made or bought for me. He was kind, he was attentive, he was wonderful. But he was not my husband. There was no love. There were moments when I saw that he wanted to tell me something, but then the moment passed and he became distant again. Sometimes he would come home from work and rush to tell me about his day. He hugged me and pressed me to him, and then a blank look appeared on his face. Sorry, I forgot we're not like that anymore, he said. It was so painful, but I deserve it. I did this to him. As my belly grew and my body changed, becoming puffy and fat, I lost it for a while. It's like when a guy who is very fast gets injured and can no longer run fast, he always wonders if he will be as fast when he recovers. All my life, I only cared about being beautiful or cute. Some women never get their bodies back after pregnancy. I started to feel very bad. Jake, you've even ruined that, I said. He put cocoa butter on my belly so I wouldn't have stretch marks after the baby was born. Well, now you definitely don't have to worry about me cheating on you, I said. I'm so puffy and fat that no one would want me. He just burst out laughing. Aubrey, you're even prettier now, he said. I relaxed and let his fingers massage my stomach. It was so nice. Sometimes I feel like I just can't help but do this, he trailed off. What exactly? I asked. Jake, tell me. I noticed then that we were leaning towards each other and were so close that only a few inches separated us. My hand was no longer at my side, it was on his leg, slowly moving up. Then he suddenly sat up and moved away from me. Sorry, he suddenly said. Even though that idiot did it to me, I won't do it to him. Jake, what the hell are you talking about? I snorted. Aubrey, when the baby is born, Steve's divorce should be over and you three can be together. Jake, shut up, I said. There's no scenario where I end up with Steve. Well, he said. To hell with it. Jake, I screwed up, we all know that. But I love you, and only you. I'm going to be completely honest with you here. I'll probably be a really lousy mother. I need you to be there when this baby is born. If this is your baby, and I'm 100% sure of that, I know you, Jake. You're going to want to be in your baby's life. And Jake, I want you there. I don't belong to Steve or anyone else except you. I'm yours, Jake. I've always been yours and always will be. So whatever you're thinking of doing with me, I want you to do it. I miss you, Jake. I miss having you next to me when I sleep. I miss waking up in your arms more than anything. And I miss intimacy with you, Jake, but most of all, I miss your smile and I miss that look in your eyes that you always had when you saw me. You always made me feel so special. I didn't feel like a trophy or a piece of fifth place with you. And you always made me feel so damn special. Will you do one more thing for me? I asked him. He nodded. Jake, can I sleep with you tonight? I begged him. No night, I promise. I just want to feel you close. I woke up in the middle of the night with the sound of Jake's breathing in my ear. It was comforting, and I felt loved. I knew that if I did something stupid, he would never let me be that close to him again. I closed my eyes and went back to sleep with the biggest smile on my face. It was awkward this morning. I'm so sorry, he said. I knew it was a bad idea. The only bad idea is us not having an intim, I said. Well, I'll go to work soon, he said. Maybe you can find someone to come. I knew it was just his pain and jealousy, so I let it go. That night, after dinner, I showed up in his room again. From then on, we slept together. I considered this significant progress and a sign that things would eventually work out my way. When our baby was born, Jake was with me all the time. He held my hand throughout the entire process and saw the baby before I did. Once the umbilical cord was cut, the doctor came over and swabbed Jake's mouth. We had to wait 3 days for the results since the baby and I were sent home 24 hours after delivery. I had to return to the hospital for the results. Jake suggested we go alone since I was still pretty weak, but I insisted on being there. Jake had a surprise for me. However, when we arrived at the doctor's office, Steve was there. He looked terrible. He spoke to me briefly while Jake left the room to answer the phone. "I'm only here because Jake promised to drop his lawsuit against me," he said. "I hope you're happy." "What are you talking about, Steve?" I asked. "My wife divorced me. She barely lets me see my kids. I work as a medical technician in a factory. I live in a studio apartment in the basement. You went back to Jake. How is that fair?" he asked. "Steve, Jake and I are only together for the baby. If my baby ends up being yours, my life will be over. I haven't had an intim since he caught you and me together. I have to rub myself against him every night, and he doesn't like me. He's changed, Steve. We destroyed him." Jake returned to the room just as the doctor sat down. "Mr. Zama," said the doctor, "I have terrible news for you." "I expected it," Jake said. "Good luck, Steve," he almost smiled as he stood up. "What I meant," the doctor said, "is that you have a lot of responsibilities ahead of you over the next 18 years or so. Your freedom is gone, Mr. Dama, you are a father." Jake was shocked, his jaw dropped, and his smile broke out in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I was so happy that I jumped. I almost tore my stitches, but I didn't care. Jake took time off from work to be with me and the baby for the first 2 months after the baby was born. I was not allowed to have a night. It was a little longer than usual, but I had some problems after giving birth. The good thing is that my body quickly returned to normal. I looked forward to resuming physical intimacy with my husband, and on the day the doctor gave me the go-ahead, I attacked him. Jake was lying in bed after I put JJ to bed. I entered our room and took off my robe. I lifted the blanket and threw my leg over Jake. He just looked at me. "What are you doing?" he asked. "The doctor gave me the okay today," I said. "Well, if you want to go out, I'll sit with JJ, he said. I just thought. "I love you, Jake," I said through tears. It took me a while to get over that night, and I think Jake knew it too. After that, he was especially nice to me. "Jake, my birthday is coming up," I told him one morning. "Were you planning a gift for me?" "I'll buy you anything you want, Aubrey," he said. "You don't have to wait for your birthday." "You have 2 options," I said. "I either want a night where you love me all night like you used to, or 3 months of couples therapy." I probably should have been offended, but when we sat down in the therapist's office, I felt like it could help us. The first 2 sessions were dedicated to making us feel comfortable and safe in the office. The next week, we started with honesty. The therapist warned us that the truth hurts sometimes, but we needed to express all our feelings in order to move on. Jake started first. He told us everything he had ever felt from the day he first saw me until my mistake. "Some things," he said, "I never knew." It's really eye-opening when someone says you're the reason for everything they do. I always knew he loved me, but he made it clear how he always felt about me. He then talked about how he was feeling now. He talked about how he still thought I was beautiful and how I became even hot after our son was born. He was brutally honest when he talked about wanting to get me pregnant again. "So, is this what you'll do when you get home?" asked the doctor. "Of course not," Jake said. "And why not?" asked the doctor. "We're not like that anymore," Jake said. "So, you don't love her anymore?" asked the doctor. Jake looked out the window. "It's okay, you can be honest here. Maybe we can explain why you stopped loving your wife. Is it because she had a night with another man, or is there some other reason?" Jake spoke so quietly that we almost didn't hear him. "What is this?" asked the doctor. "I said I still love her," Jake mumbled, "but she's not mine anymore." At that moment, I could no longer hold back my tears and ran out. At home, Jake walked in as I was rocking his son to sleep. "Sorry," he said. "I thought I should be honest." Jake, it's not your honesty that hurts me, I said. I know what I've done to us, to you the most, but you have to understand, believe me or not, I'm yours. I'm as yours as that child or that damn car. Why do you think I've been going without intimate for over a year? I made my mistakes, and I will never repeat them. Ever. The next week was my turn to be completely honest, and I told the truth. I told them how broken and alienated I was when I first met Jake. I knew there was something special about him. I told them almost everything. I didn't mention the other times I had a night with other men before I got caught. It wouldn't make Jake feel any better, and since I'd never do it again, they didn't matter. I told him about my relationship with Steve and how I realized that I only had love in my heart for one person. I thought my story would explain to him how much I loved him and why what happened would never happen again. But who can understand men? When I finished, I expected him to understand me better, but I was wrong. My honesty became my downfall. You've been lying to me all these years, he said. Every time you said it was a lie. All the years we made love and I opened my heart to you, you lied to me. Every time you walked me to work and kissed me goodbye saying you loved me, they were all lies. When we stood before God and all our friends and you swore to be faithful to me, you lied every damn day until your great epiphany. You lied to me. You looked me in the eyes, smiled at me, and told lies, honey. You've got it all wrong, I said. You are the first and only person I have ever loved. How do I know you're not lying right now? He asked. After that, things got very bad. We didn't even sleep together. Jake woke up early and left before I woke up. He stayed late after work and only came home to put JJ to bed and then went to bed himself. Finally, one evening, I took the baby from his arms, and he shook his head. You three would be good together, he said. How? I asked. It wouldn't be good for your son and me to be with that. He's your son, Jake, not Steve's. He had to be, he said. He then handed me the divorce papers and left the house. I think he's been working on it again since I came clean, and looking back, I can't say I blamed him. Jake being truly honest with me confirmed the fact that he loved me even more than I ever thought. He's been tearing himself apart for the last 2 years. He couldn't reconcile the fact that he still loved me with the fact that I lied to him over and over again. My day of honesty only brought him more bad news, especially the fact that I never really loved him until it was too late. Being with me was killing him, being without him will slowly kill me. But I really love him, so I let him go. I didn't have to ask him for anything during the divorce, he was very generous. But every day, I died a little. I gave him joint custody and allowed him to come and pick up JJ anytime he wanted. I hoped that over time, he would want me back. I continued to see a therapist. I had a lot of problems to solve, but in the end, he couldn't do anything for me. I just couldn't care about anyone but Jake. I bought myself a really good intim toy and practiced with it regularly. I also kept in touch with Brenda. She told me that Jake worked too hard for too long, but there was nothing else in his life these days. He lives with our son. He didn't date or see anyone. According to Brenda, he was dying slowly. I decided to do the most selfless thing I could for him. I arranged a chance meeting with a very nice woman. She was about my age, and although she wasn't me, she was very beautiful and very innocent. No games for her. We introduced her as a friend to Brenda, who stopped by to go to lunch with her. My heart broke the day this happened. They say that any decent-looking woman can win any man she wants. Well, Erica immediately glanced at Jake, and Brenda was sure that Erica wanted Jake. He didn't even give her a second glance. When she intensified her attempts from innocent flirtation to a full-scale offensive, he gave her a hard refusal. He told her straight up that while he appreciated the attention, he wasn't interested. So, this brings us to... We started. The person I love the most also loves me. Neither of us can or will be happy with anyone else. I just need him to forgive me and give me another chance. So, Jake, how about a weekend away with your ex? I asked. Thanks for the offer, he said politely, but I already have plans. I'm sure, I said. Another night alone in front of the TV for both of us, right, Aubrey? You're young, you're beautiful, go find someone. We're divorced. He got into his car and drove away. One tear rolled down my cheek. Because of my sad story, I love him. He loves me, but we just can't be together. As I drove away from home, I felt a pang of regret. I loved her so much, always loved, and by the look in her eyes, perhaps she loved me too. The saddest thing was that neither of us was happy without the other. I would like to understand what exactly separates us. As I pulled onto the highway, thoughts of my emotional problems faded into the background before the need to concentrate on maneuvering through traffic. Then I saw a red Camaro up ahead. This time, I didn't have my son in the car. My heavy right foot dropped. I turned the steering wheel sharply to the left, and within seconds, I was next to the Camaro. The driver saw me and increased the gas. We both rushed forward. The speedometer needle circled 100, 120, 130, and the Camaro fell behind at 140. I was ahead and kept going, leaving the Camaro in a permanent place in the rearview mirror that was reserved for losers. The guy turned on the headlights, and we turned off the highway. I pulled into the parking lot of a crowded restaurant. I was too smart to meet a stranger in a place that wasn't very public. As he pulled up, the tinted driver's side window rolled down a little so he could get a good look at me, and then the door opened. "Good race," I said. "What did I win?" "Whatever you want, Mr. Adama." "But how about a date first?" she said. I recognized her immediately. She was a tall, thin female detective, cop by day, street racer by night. "Right," I laughed. "The girl needs to relieve tension somehow." She smiled. "I heard you finally divorced that crazy woman you were married to. So maybe we can meet here tomorrow evening?" "Okay," I said. "Why not?" The next day, I was looking forward to the meeting. I was looking forward to just spending time with someone, anyone. After work, I got into the car and drove to the restaurant. As soon as she arrived, I saw her from the window. She looked great. When she came in and sat down, every guy in the place was looking at her. I knew I had to get out of there. I wasn't where I needed to be. I paid for her dinner and thanked her for her time, then left. 10 minutes later, I was knocking on the door. As soon as she saw me through the peephole, the door opened. "Hey, honey. I'm sorry, but he's already asleep. Do you want to come in and look at him? I watch him sleep all the time. He breathes the same way you do when you sleep." I grabbed her and kissed her. She offered no resistance. The funny thing is, she didn't even ask me what happened. After we finished, she continued to keep herself wrapped around me, as if she was afraid I would disappear. I hugged her and covered us with a blanket. "Will you be staying a while?" she asked, "or is this just a quick visit?" "I'm just so happy you're here," I sighed. "Jake, why are you crying?" I asked. "I'm just so happy you're here," she said. "I'll take whatever I can get, Aubrey." "I love you," I said. "I know, fool," she said, hugging me tighter, "and I love you too. Maybe it took me longer, but I needed you to teach me how, and I will wait for you forever." "Okay, we can talk about this in the morning," I said. "Will you spend the night with me?" she asked excitedly. "No, I'll spend forever with you," I said, yawning. She hugged me even tighter, and there was silence for several minutes. "Jake," she asked, "I know it's your first night back and everything." I answered. "Can we do this again?" This time we lived happily ever after. The end. What do you think of our story today? It seems to me that husband and wife were made for each other, and that's why they were able to overcome all the difficulties that came their way. What do you think? Write in the comments. See you in the next video.